Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. Today I am joined by Dr. Michelle Slater, a professor of comparative literature and the author of Starving to Heal in Siberia, her story of full recovery from chronic Lyme disease. I'm looking forward to sitting down with her now. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and we'll get back to you personally. Michelle, I want to welcome you here. I'm very excited to hear about your story. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Dan. I'm excited to be here as well.
So we were talking beforehand. I don't often talk about what we were talking about beforehand in the interview, but I was really fascinated by what you were saying because you suffered from a very long-term illness, and you've had 5 years of 6 years of totally solid health since. And now,
5. Yes. I was 6. I apologize. I was
okay.
Severely ill for 6 years,
Got it.
now 5 years of full recovery.
Okay, so you're well into your good health. I understand you have a little bit of a cold, and that's actually unfamiliar to you, which is a wonderful thing. So let's jump back and talk about what happened here. When I have people on the show, often, especially when they've had mind-body experiences, I really want to hear about their experiences. So take me back. I know you won't mind going back to it now that you're out of it. How did it start?
I still don't like going back to it, and I never tell new people I meet that I ever had Lyme disease unless, well, now there's the book. But I like to just, be shining and bouncing as I say it in my book. Mm-hmm. But yes, going back, I began to experience these alarming symptoms, and I was a very high functioning person. I was a professor at the university. I ran marathons. I skied. I was in the middle of, writing academic articles, working on a book, and, delivering papers at conferences. And I had a German Shepherd to walk every day, I had a duty to him. And all of a sudden, I was having a hard time walking him and even holding the leash. And it was taking me almost twice as long to prepare my lectures and do my grading. And things that were just mysterious just started happening in my body, and it was unacceptable to me. And I knew that I couldn't exist as a professor at the university if I couldn't remember how to finish the sentence, because I wasn't sure how I started it. So that's when I knew something was really, really wrong. And then it took me time to get diagnosed. And so I went through, a harrowing experience just with that, because, it's very difficult to diagnose Lyme, especially if it's already become chronic and you didn't know that you had it at first. Mm-hmm. So then when I did get a diagnosis, I spent about 6 years going to the best Lyme doctors and taking the gold standard antibiotics. And when that didn't work, I've always been a big believer in organic vegetables, a plant-based diet. I had been raw vegan for a long time. I had done a lot of juice fasting, and so I was always incorporating, the healthiest things I could put into my diet. But I saw naturopaths. I did every treatment imaginable, including energy treatments, a lot of Reiki, energy clearing, all sorts of things. And then I came to this place where I could not get out of bed, Dan. And the doctors kept saying, you have to get used to a new normal. It's very hard to recover from late stage neurological Lyme. And at this point, I had stopped teaching a long time ago. Marathons and skiing were completely out of the question. So being bedridden in this body that was no longer functioning and a mind that was no longer functioning, I couldn't even read or write or even watch anything. So I was really literally looking for a last ditch effort at that point.
Wow. I'm blown away by what it is that you were going through, because I had 8 years of chronic back pain, and that was really, really bad in a lot of ways. But I did still have my mind in large measure. I will say the pain made it hard at various times, and it made it certainly not fun. It's not like I was celebrating having my mind. But as you're talking about it, it seems like one of your symptoms was maybe a kind of brain fog or something like that. I wanted you to describe the symptoms just a bit more, because for my viewers, it's going to be helpful for them to know what was it that you were struggling with.
Absolutely. And I am sorry that you had that experience. I think pain is debilitating. And even if your mind is working, it's hard to focus if you are
Yeah.
confronted with pain every day. So
And I couldn't stop thinking about it anyway. So even though I did have a mind, it was a mind that was spent almost entirely on the pain.
I'm so sorry. I do have a lot of compassion for that. And for all of your listeners who are experiencing chronic illnesses. So my symptoms in my body, the list is so long, and they would vary. Things would come and go and move, and then I would get new symptoms. But I did have a lot of joint pain. My hands and feet were also really afflicted. So they were kind of like claws. I couldn't drive because I couldn't really hold my hand around the steering wheel. I couldn't hold my hand around a book, or even texting was incredibly painful. I had never had headaches before, but I had these Lyme migraines. And then I developed these sinus issues, insomnia, tachycardia. I had a whole host of issues physically, and mentally. It was complete brain fog. I couldn't remember anything. I was leaving things places. I've always been this organized person. I couldn't. Someone asked me what I wrote my dissertation on, and I couldn't even tell them. And so for me, that is the worst nightmare possible, to lose the capacity of my mind. And I thought, I didn't know how this worked. I thought that I would never get that back. My fear was that I would never get that back, that once you lose it, it doesn't come back. So I was very alarmed about that. And it was just, and then there was a lot of chronic fatigue as well. So I would sleep and I would rest, and I still couldn't get out of bed. And I thought, well, I'm well rested. Why can't I get out of bed? And so so with the brain fog, I became an unreliable person in every regard. I could not be counted on. And I'd always been you can count on Michelle Slater. She's responsible. She's serious. You can count on her. And I was no longer that person.
Wow. Fascinating on a number of levels. I don't know if you will be familiar with this, but one of the things that I've found in the work that I do is that the people who suffer from these kind of hard to explain physical experiences, they often are what this medical doctor, who I think is fantastic, Dr. Sarno. I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Sarno.
I have.
But he talks about something called goodists. These are people who are very responsible, very kind and compassionate. You scream goodest, and so do I.
Thank you, Dan.
And so it does make me think, wow, you really fit into this whole range of things that I see across the board. You are the type of person that has it. And look, it even seems to me that the symptoms almost attacked you at the worst source, the one that would cause the most fear. You're a comparative literature professor, and you couldn't think.
And I couldn't think. So I couldn't teach my students anymore. So I had to leave my tenure track job that I'd worked so hard to achieve, and my students who I loved teaching. And so, and then I always like to bring, light to the people around me. And I just couldn't do that anymore. So I really withdrew and isolated myself, because I felt that I had nothing to give to my friends and family or students. And I was just draining people. So I really isolated myself. I wouldn't say that I never got depressed. I would not go there. I was always searching for a way out. But I did isolate and withdraw, because I thought, I'm just draining people and I have nothing to give. So I had best just tuck myself away.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you if there were certain things that made you lose hope along the way, particularly. Of course, everybody in the situation that you were in or that I was in, we do lose hope. We do not feel we're going to get better. We're even told directly we're not going to get better sometimes, as I was and as you were. So what were the things that made you lose hope?
So I would say, Dan, that after having tried industrial strength antibiotics for a long period of time on a pulsed program with a renowned Lyme specialist who I respect, and all of my alternative methodologies in conjunction with that. And I tried very hard. It was a full-time job to devote myself to this wellness routine. I tried electrodes with the Rife machines and pulsing. And I meditate a lot, so I was constantly addressing any despair that I felt through my meditations, because I knew that I needed to keep up my resilience to some extent so that I could keep fighting and looking for a solution. And as a trained researcher, even if I couldn't read, I would even spend a few minutes searching, looking for peer-reviewed articles. And then I started just looking on internet forums of other patients who might have found cures. So what did put me in a state of despair was when none of that worked. And in the summer of 2017, at that point, I had developed an autoimmune disorder because my immune system was so low from fighting off the Lyme. And I had candida from taking the antibiotics. And so it just felt like my entire body was falling apart. And I could not get out of bed. I had spent months in bed at that point. And I thought, I cannot go on. I cannot go on. And I cannot live in this body and in this mind. And so I think I'm going to commit assisted suicide, because I think that would be the best thing for everyone, because I'm becoming a burden. So I didn't want to do that. So I thought, I'm going to look for last ditch efforts, things that are not peer reviewed, things that are radical, that might even, I wasn't thinking like this, but things that might even frighten my friends and family. And one day I came across this Siberian doctor's quote on a forum for other patients. And I thought, aha, this is the most magical thing I have heard, and I'm willing to try it.
So tell me about it. There are things I'm going to want to back up at some point to hear about particular things in the struggle. But since we've arrived at the treatment that really did bring you relief, take me there. Tell me what you heard about it and what it was like.
So first, what I would like to say is that, I am not a medical doctor. I do have a PhD from Johns Hopkins, and I've conducted a lot of research, but I do refer anyone to Dr. Filonov, who is the Siberian doctor, who has a website, drfilonov.net, and he is an MD. And so anyone who is interested, I would say, do not do this at home. Instead, please go and consult with him. He is very reasonable. He's practically free. He just wants to see people get well and not make a profit. So he's very accessible. But so what I did was I found this forum that said that dry fasting causes the body to act, the cells to act as if they are thermonuclear reactors, and they incinerate inflammation and diseased cells. And it sounded mythical to me, and I was somewhat delirious. I was lying in bed. It was an afternoon in July, and I was supposed to be at a concert in London, and I knew my friends were there having a wonderful time, and I was in bed yet another day in a row, and I had nothing to lose. And so I thought, I'm going to try this. It can't be worse than how I feel. I'm going to try this for 24 hours right here and right now. So I didn't tell anyone, and I just abstained from food and water for 24 hours just to see, if I could make a first foray into this methodology. Like I said, I don't recommend starting as I did, but I was in a moment of desperation. Sure. And I felt that I had literally nothing to lose. So that's what I did. And that's how it started.
What did you have any particular results from that experience? Just that experience alone?
So what I will tell you is that there's a whole entire protocol to follow. Dr. Filanov likes patients to have prepared for a few months before they come to him for an extended dry fast. But his medical dry fasts take 9 days of consecutive days of abstaining from food and water and external showers, and you don't brush your teeth or rinse your mouth with water, so you come into no contact with liquids or food at all. So it takes 9 days of doing that consecutively without interruption to reach the point where the cells are,
wow. So, and
the cells are getting incinerated.
Does he provide some kind of nutrients or something along the way to keep you going? How does that work?
So the nutrients are coming, Dan, from what is already inside of your body. So the average person with adipose tissue and cells has enough reserves to absolutely sustain through a dry fast of 9 days. And the body also has this very sophisticated process of, the organs are resting, the healthy cells are preserved, and then it's employing all of these sophisticated ways of finding the cells that need to be recycled and eliminating cellular debris, but keeping the healthy cells and using the internal water supply to continue to fuel the body. But you're not running, you're not going to work, you're respecting the process and resting. So no, the first 24-hour dry fast didn't produce any health results, but it told me that it was possible. I was willing to, actually reach out to the doctor. Mm-hmm. And it was certainly no worse than any symptom that I had from Lyme disease. Right. So I thought nothing could really be worse than this. So let's give it a try.
So something about it gave you hope, and that often is the turning point when we start to get some kind of hope, and especially around something that can make some sense. And for me, it was very important that Dr. Sarno was a medical doctor. I felt I had a medical issue, and I guess in some ways I did, but in some ways it was a psychological one. It's really where the two meet, for me anyway. So this gave you some hope, and I was thinking about this kind of was interesting to me, because what I was going to ask you about before we even got into the treatment was I wanted to talk a little bit about the isolation that people have when they have these symptoms. And it's kind of funny to me that you went to Siberia to feel not isolated. Usually that's associated with complete isolation. And yet Dan, that's where you found connection.
I made a lot of jokes with my doctor when I arrived there about stereotypes surrounding Siberia. Mm-hmm. In truth, it is one of the loveliest places, this part of Siberia. It's lush mountains and rivers and wildflowers and songbirds, and the doctor and his family are lovely and welcoming, and they all work for his practice, and the other patients are welcoming. So it's actually this little very warm community. Mm-hmm. in this place. There's nothing about the tundra or the gulag. I did make jokes about that, right. Especially since I was starving. Mm-hmm. So I did call him my gulag doctor a couple of times. But it was actually not isolating there at all.
Well, so I wanted to ask you though about isolation. Were you? I know you have a 3-year-old daughter. It sounded like.
Yes.
Did you? You didn't have kids at the time though.
No, I didn't.
Okay, and were you married? What was your social situation? Because it can be very isolating when you go through these things.
So I was married actually to a Russian, and I would say that I did have an inner circle, but if you've been sick for this long, my father was extremely supportive. If you are sick for as long as I was, you do start to try the patience of everyone around you, especially when they'd always counted on you to be the one who got everything done. So I was able though to do just enough so that I wasn't really missed. But then, it did cost me a lot every time I made an appearance. I felt exhausted and just hightailed it back to bed. And I'd have to say too, Dan, that I'm an only child. I could entertain myself for months by myself and not feel lonely. But I have a lot of friends and I like to see them too. But you know, I'm perfectly happy to be in my own solitude.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe the isolation wasn't a major part of what was hard for you.
No.
I felt very separated from people. I felt I didn't feel so much that I was taxing them. I felt more that they were not understanding what I was going through, and that added to, it was like another layer of my suffering. So I just wanted to see what that was like for you. Interestingly, you had really not that experience so much.
You know, I have to say I've never worried too much about, you know, how I was being. I just this is how it is, and I can't seem to do anything about it right now. And so I didn't really give that much thought.
Okay.
I was on my journey to try to find a path to wellness. And
well, it's interesting how it takes a unique form for each person. And so now I wanted to ask you, now that you're better and you've been better for, 5 years, what do you see as being the change agents? What was it that led to the change for you?
It's that I will say was a simple scientific process of autophagy that Yosunori Osumi won the Nobel Prize for in 2016, but my doctor Filanov has been practicing for 30 years. I put my body through these extended 9-day dry fasts, and it killed off the diseased tissues in my cells. And at the same time, in conjunction with that, I employed my lifelong techniques of meditation. I spent most of that time meditating. Each dry fast, I meditated. I surrendered any fears I had, any doubts. And I just said, the body is the doctor. And I'm going to let the mind rest. And I'm going to let spirit take its place. And the body will do the work. And I really just kept surrendering and breathing in the light and going through these practices. But really, we killed off the diseased tissues in my body. And when you do that, the whole entire immune system gets rebuilt. So the white blood cells are rebuilt, stem cells are regenerated. I literally felt, Dan, after the second extended long dry fast in Siberia, I felt like I had been reincarnated into the 17-year-old version of myself. I literally felt like I was just skipping and bouncing. My memory came back. I was looking at the stars one night and I could identify every one of the 7 stars in the Pleiad constellation. And I thought, wait, is this? And then I started thinking about my dissertation. I was like, my memory has come back.
Wow.
And so it was literally a process of killing off what was diseased in my body, and at the same time having this spiritual relationship to it. And so I think that the two of those things in conjunction just completely renewed my body. And since then I've been writing my books and running. I run every day and skiing, and I had my daughter, and that's why I wrote the book, because I thought I must share this story because it could help a lot of people.
Well, you're definitely skipping and bouncing, and that's wonderful, wonderful to see. I was thinking, for the people who watch my show and listen to the podcast, there's often questions in their minds about what's the nature of my suffering? How much of this is purely physical? How much of it comes from psychology, or how much can be altered that way? And I'm sure you are well aware of this, having suffered as you did with the illness that you had. there's actually a lot of debate about Lyme disease and what it means and how to think about it. And I tend to think about my audience from a particular vantage point. I like to bring down their doubts with science and logic. I just want everything to make sense, because if it doesn't, the mind can run rampant and so much can happen in the body because of it. So I wanted to just visit this issue a little bit and hear from you about how do you think about this debate about Lyme disease and what people say about it?
So I am aware of the debate about Lyme disease, and I can only say that, you know, I did all of the testing. My Lyme specialist. My Lyme specialist is sort of a sleuth about getting into the inner workings behind chronic Lyme, and so he would do these tests on white blood cells like the CD57 count, and mine was rock bottom, which to him indicated that it had been chronic for a very long time. And I think that the debate or the controversy on whether it does exist or chronic Lyme does exist, that's lovely for a researcher to have that thought, but there are thousands and millions of patients out there who experience these symptoms, and so I think it's rather insulting to be told that something doesn't exist, because
absolutely.
there's a political component to the treatment.
Well, absolutely. I guess the way I was thinking about it, and hopefully you won't find this part insulting, because I certainly don't mean it as such, but I think the way I think about it is, no matter what's happening, there's no way you could possibly have had those symptoms without there being something physically going on. So
absolutely,
whatever
and
we
I
would
was
call
the person who I was looking to there. I have found, I would like to say, Dan, that I do mention this in my book too, that there are a lot of people I found at first I would go to some support groups, because in my area in Southern Connecticut, it's rampant with Lyme. And I found, and I don't want to insult anyone listening, that people seem to identify themselves as being sick and calling themselves Lymies. And I stopped going immediately, because I thought, I didn't feel like they wanted to get better. I felt like they had formed solidarity and a part of their identity. I was never staying in this, I have Lyme, I have Lyme. And my mantra was, I am finding a way out. I am finding a way out.
Wow. Yeah.
And so it wasn't like I wanted to embrace these physical symptoms. I was absolutely trying to find a way out of them all the time.
Well, I would say that to me, you're striking the exact right balance, which makes it not so surprising that you did get out, even though I know it was very harrowing and incredibly hard. To me, this is the balance that I see. We can't treat these things as if they're in people's heads and not real, because that's garbage. That's right. Not true. But it's also important on the other side of things to not over-identify with the illness as if it's a roadblock that's always going to stand in our way. And that's what I love about your story, among other things.
Thank you, Dan.
Two primary things. One, you had this unshakable desire to get better, and you were going to go after it. And that sounds like part of just how you are, but you applied it very well. And then when you were there, you had this great combination between a medical doctor who had an idea of how they could help from a medical standpoint, and your own psychological basis, which it sounds like you knew all along could play a big role in getting you better. And it sure sounds like it did.
All the way through my illness, I meditated. I did distress tolerance meditations when the pain was great. I was constantly meditating. I was constantly employing that technique throughout my entire experience with Lyme. Even if I couldn't sit up and meditate, if I just was, curled up in my fetal position, positioned on pillows, I was still in that I was in that space. So I was always relying on that. but particularly to endure them, the long dry fasts, I found it incredibly helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask it's a difficult question that you don't have to have an answer to. You could just say, I don't know. I'm wondering, like, what percentage of you getting better did have something to do with your mindset in your mind?
I would say that most people, not to be disparaging, but I think that a lot of people would have given up long before I did, because my body was really uninhabitable. There were days where I couldn't get down to the kitchen, to make breakfast or tea or anything. I would slide down the stairs on my bottom. And when I got to the bottom, I was so tired out from that experience, I would just curl up and take a nap at the bottom of my stairs on the floor. So I think that enduring that would be very hard for anyone, including myself. But I know that about 1,200 people a year do commit suicide with Lyme-related symptoms, and they've now researchers have now identified a component in depression and the Lyme. So, I mean, it is a situation of despair, but I believe in resilience.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know for sure that, just from what you're telling me, that you used your mind for good purposes, for survival, to endure, to get through. That is unquestionably the case. One of the things I'm wondering about is, do you think that a changed mindset can change things in the body in a way that played a role for you? And it's okay if you don't think that or do. I'm just curious.
I have a long history of wondering about that question myself. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's absolutely true, Dan. I think it absolutely plays a role.
Well, I'm very, very glad that you found your way through. I'm glad that you found help that could give you hope. I'm glad that you had the strength to endure during the times where you wouldn't have had much reason to hope. But I'm also really glad that you are aware that your mind played a role in this, because one of the things I love about that is it sets us all on a path where we're in better shape for the rest of our lives. So when I got better from back pain, I didn't just get better from back pain. I got better from the fear of the physical world, as if I couldn't have any effect on it. I now had a sense that I had a role to play, and I can hear that in you. I think that's part of your bounce now.
It is, absolutely, Dan. Absolutely, that's true. And I feel that I have a mission to pay it forward. And so I'm a pretty private person, but I wanted to write this book right away when I got better, because I wanted to be able to help other people who had been in my situation. And it's not obviously just for Lyme. My doctor treats people with a variety of conditions across the boards, but I wanted to be able to inspire other people to not give up.
Well, I was just going to say, you are an inspiration, and I want to thank you for coming on to my show and talking to me and my audience about this. So glad you're better, and thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. I really enjoyed sharing my experience and discussing these profound details with you. Thank you. And that you are better as well. We can both celebrate.
Well, thank you for that. What a fascinating story. There's so many ways that people go through these kinds of experiences that are so harrowing, as we talked about with Michelle. There were a couple things that jumped out at me. First of all, I thought it was really interesting how much of a goodist she clearly is right from the start, and also that her symptoms took the form that would have been most scary to her. She's a comparative literature professor, and she lives with her thinking. And to have the symptoms attack where the symptoms would matter most was very striking to me. So as I was just formulating what's going on here, I was thinking about those things. Then, of course, there was the issue of Lyme disease. This is a hot-button issue that people talk about, and they talk about it in ways that I think do require a balance, and I was very pleased that she and I struck the right balance on it. It is real. There's something real going on physically. It can be very nebulous what that is, how it plays out, But I liked that she was not only open to the idea that your mind affects this, but she was aware it played a major role in her recovery. It also did kind of crack me up that she recovered going to Siberia, where we can often feel so isolated in our struggles, but she didn't. Not even in Siberia, at least of all in Siberia. So I'm so happy that she got better. I hope this story was one that can bring you hope and to help you think about how the mind can affect the body in these profound, profound ways. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and we'll get back to you personally.